Welcome to WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. It's your old pal Jake coming to you from the void. And I got a couple of real maddening things today, as well as some enlightening things. We're doing it a little bit of a later show to start because we just did a wonderful interview with the folks from the True North Eager Beaver podcast. There are a couple of Canadian lefties, or really they're just political commentators, but they are from Canada, and they talk about both Canadian and U.S. politics. It's a great show. I recommend you check out the True North Eager Beaver podcast if you get a chance. We're going to feature their interview on this show shortly, but first I have to edit my dumb face out of it. Let's get right into the infuriating news, so that we can go on with some of the more fun stuff and enjoy ourselves. First up, Matt Gaetz appears to be getting a pass from the Department of Justice. Matt Gaetz was suspected of trafficking a teenager, an underage person, for sex. And his pal, Joel Greenberg, is in prison for that. But much like with Michael Cohen and Donald Trump, the more powerful politician, the powerful politician in that pair, is getting a pass. We don't know why, because the DOJ has not told us why. I'm anticipating at some point a press release from them announcing it. This news is coming, however, from Gaetz's office. So again, it's coming from Gaetz, not the DOJ. It's technically possible that the investigation is still on, but it's been floundering, and we should have seen action already if they were going to go ahead with it. Let's have a look at this article from the AP. Representative Matt Gaetz, a Republican known for his strong support of former President Trump and membership in the arch-conservative Freedom Caucus, freedom being a hell of a word to use for what they stand for, in the House, said Wednesday that the Justice Department has ended a sex trafficking case with no charges against him, despite the fact, and look at me, Matt Gaetz and your lawyers, that he did it. I welcome a lawsuit. I would love a lawsuit. Please do. See if that's libelous. You engage in sex trafficking, Matt Gaetz. The lawmaker, who represents much of the Florida Panhandle, issued a statement through his congressional office that the long-running investigation was over. Gaetz had insisted throughout that he was innocent of any wrongdoing, even though his pal, Joel Greenberg, is in prison for it. The Department of Justice has confirmed to Congressman Gaetz's attorneys that their investigation has concluded and that he will not be charged with any crimes, the statement said. Of course, our brave Justice Department declined to comment. Federal prosecutors were investigating, before they got cold feet, whether Gaetz and one-time political ally Joel Greenberg paid underage girls and escorts child prostitution, is what he was under investigation for, or offered them gifts in exchange for sex, according to two people familiar with the case. Greenberg, a fellow Republican who served as the tax collector in Florida's Seminole County, admitted as part of a plea deal with prosecutors that he paid women and an underage girl to have sex with him and other men. This is Matt Gaetz's longtime friend. Matt Gaetz, well known for being scum. The men were not identified in court documents when he pleaded guilty. Before that, however, the Justice Department seemed real interested in Gaetz. Greenberg was sentenced in late 2022 to 11 years in federal prison for a variety of crimes. Federal investigators were looking into a trip that Gaetz took to the Bahamas with a group of women and Jason Porizzolo, a hand surgeon and Gaetz' campaign donor, and whether the women were paid or received gifts to have sex with the men, said a person familiar with the matter. David Haas, a lawyer for Porozzolo, said in a statement Wednesday that he received a similar notification from the Justice Department about the investigation being closed. Wouldn't dream of putting a rich man in prison. Prosecutors had also been investigating whether Gaetz and his associates tried to secure government jobs for some of the women, the People said. Prosecutors were scrutinizing Gaetz's connection to the medical marijuana sector, including whether his associates sought to influence legislation Gaetz sponsored, of course. The House Ethics Committee in 2021 announced an investigation into Gaetz. The opening of that bipartisan inquiry was one of the first official indications that Gaetz's party leaders were willing to scrutinize his actions, but not, of course, not the Department of Justice. They would only scrutinize his actions if absolutely forced to. And even then, no promise that they will hold a Republican accountable for anything. I just talked about this with the True North folks. It's the same thing in Canada. The conservatives are much less likely to be prosecuted. This needs to stop. I'll be real with you. I don't foresee a situation where the Justice Department is forced to act. That said, we must, for the sake of these women, for the sake of decency in the country, be loud about this. There's a link in the description. Contact the Justice Department. Call them clowns, because that's what they are. Call them pawns, because that's what they are. Let loose. Don't make any threats. Don't say anything illegal. But chew them out, because they deserve it. The Justice Department has failed. Utterly failed. I have no confidence that they completed a thorough investigation of Gaetz. I have no confidence that they made a genuine effort to build a case against the man, because there's mountains of evidence against him, and they followed the playbook. There was silence for a few months, and now Gaetz saying he's off scot-free. An utter embarrassment. This will be yet another one of the sins that goes unanswered, and as a result is a shame upon the generation of people alive on earth right now. Our grandchildren will be embarrassed by the fact that these injustices were allowed to occur on our watch. We might not have the badge, but we are collectively those responsible for what happens here and now in this generation. And it's simply unconscionable to me that Matt Gaetz would be allowed to get away with this. I do not believe that he didn't do it. I do not believe that it was ever seriously investigated. And if it was, let them come out and explain it. Because, goddamn, there's a hell of a lot of evidence pointing towards the man's guilt. They ought to explain why he was not guilty in their estimation, why they didn't think they could build a case. Because it could simply be that they're too incompetent to hold the job anymore. Regardless, I encourage you, if you are as offended by this as I am, I encourage you to write the Department of Justice and let them know, at the very least, so that they know how closely they are being watched these days, that we are no longer in the days when you can simply give a pass to powerful people and trust that the American people will ignore it. Don't ignore it. On a somewhat similar note, Joy Reid interviewed the whistleblower from Twitter about the dangers currently present in the world of social media. And I have to say, her responses were a little frustrating to hear. Let's have a listen. I'll chime in. Let me know what you think.
If you are one of the millions of Americans who uses Twitter, you probably have noticed how it has descended all the way back into a site that fuels misogyny, anti-Semitism, racism, and anti-LGBTQ hate. This is the lasting legacy of Elon Musk, who promised to make Twitter warm and welcoming to all, but turns it into a hellish town square instead, where it is cool to shout the N-word and other disgusting stuff in public. And if you have any doubts where Musk's allegiance lies, just take a look at who he spent Sunday watching the Super Bowl with. No.
The devil?
That is not Emperor Palpatine, Star Wars fans. It is Rupert Murdoch sitting next to him in the box. Not only is Twitter a gross hellscape, but it has become the premier social media site for the incubation and birth of insurrection.
She's got the fire. A gross hellscape. All right, well done. I like it.
And coups. Look no further than January 6th, 2021 in Washington, D.C., or January 8th, 2023 in Brazil for real-life examples. Months after the attack on our Capitol, one Twitter whistleblower who risked her own safety laid out in disturbing detail how for months the company simply ignored her warnings about Trump's incitement to violence. Her name is Anika Navaroli, and she was the most senior expert on Twitter U.S. safety and policy team at the time of the attack on the Capitol. Since then, she has continued to call out the dangers of an unregulated Twitter. Here's her latest warning.
If we are going to talk about social media in the government, we need to talk about Twitter's failure to act before January 6th. I am here to tell you that doing nothing is not an option. If we continue to do nothing, violence is going to happen again.
Sadly, under Musk's leadership, Twitter has been eviscerated. He has fired 80% of the staff and left fewer than 20 full-time employees tasked with overseeing content moderation. I am joined now by former Twitter employee and whistleblower Anika Navaroli, practitioner fellow at the Digital Civil Society Lab in partnership with Stanford University. Thank you so much for being here.
It's wonderful to be here.
And happy birthday.
Thank you.
So let's talk about this, because to me, the idea of 20 people handling content moderation explains everything, because Twitter really has become a hellscape. The N-word might be the most used word on there now, as well as Nazi memes and everything. It's all back to where it was during its worst days. Talk about how it descended to that and whether it was already there on January 6, 2021.
I think that's a great question, and I think that, you know, racism and misogyny and all of these things that we're seeing on Twitter and social media are really just algorithmically amplified versions of the society in which we live. And we see this polarization playing out within our digital spaces, and we have for quite some time. And I think this really is an example of the ways in which we have been balancing these sort of ideas of free expression and safety, and the ways that we have been allowing hate speech and political speech and violence to fester in a way. And that came to a head in what we saw on January 6th.
Okay, so thing number one that annoyed me, she gave her first answer. I have no idea what she just said. Well, all right, so we allowed it to fester. In what way, Twitter expert, in what way did we allow this to fester? Explain that. I personally have an answer, but I would have liked to have her give a short, simple, straight answer to that question. She gave what instead sounded like a corporate press release, where it sounds vaguely like they're saying, this is a bad thing and we agree. And you're supposed to imply that they'll do something about it. Instead, she's put forth no specifics and just burned up some of her interview time.
Right. I mean, talk about how, I mean, as you said, it's a digital.
Joy Reid tries to bring her back. Congratulations to Joy Reid. She does a great job in this whole interview.
Sort of representation of elements of society. How does the danger of a tweet, you know, we saw testimony during the January 6th hearings about Donald Trump tweeting you know, Mike Pence doesn't have the guts. He doesn't have the courage to do what's needed. And you had Sarah Matthews, who was an aide in the White House, say that immediately led to violence. But how does that translate? Is Twitter the place where people are planning attacks, or is it encouraging people to take negative behaviors in real life? Is there some sort of connection?
I think social media plays every single one of those pieces, right? Social media is the mass communications of our day and age. And I think throughout history, we have seen the connection and the ties between hate speech and violence offline. This has happened through every emerging technology of mass media that we've seen, from radio to the moving picture to even broadcast, right? And we saw this on social media as well in the very early days with ethnic conflicts and folks like the Rohingya being murdered. We have seen this direct tie between speech and violence.
You know, on the one hand, Twitter, you know, I think about the Green Revolution in Iran. It was, you know, Twitter was such a necessity. Black Lives.
Just want to say again, I didn't really get anything from her answer here, and I want to show bad media appearances as well as good. Granted, she is not. I mean, she's not necessarily a person who's supposed to be media savvy. In the committee hearing she was being asked direct questions and could answer them. In this case, Joy Reid is teeing her up to say something, but she's given two answers now, and I haven't got much of substance from them, other than, yeah, Twitter is a mass communication method, and hate speech, when you multiply that by mass communication, equals violence. Okay. The person that makes my sandwiches down the street could have told me that.
Matter. You know, it helps it to explode because you can get information. The right has accused Twitter of primarily spending its time muffling their voices. There was the PAB, I will just shorten it, moment that you were a part of in the recent hearings, in which you pointed out the president, during the times in which they were claiming they were being muffled, was Donald Trump. And other than the Trump administration, had you ever seen another political entity demand that things be taken off Twitter because they were offended by them or because they looked bad?
Well, I'll just say, you know, the PAB moment was, in fact, a moment, and I never thought that I would be the one to enter those three words into the congressional.
But did you see any other administration make the request?
Record for all time. And I think it's really just an example of how little we know about social media. You're asking about other instances. And I think it's really important that we continue to hear from people like me and then other individuals who have had the jobs that I've had, who can continue to share these stories so that we understand how social media works.
But had you ever had a request like that before?
I can't get into that.
Yourself? Okay. Well, and the other question, I guess.
Well, then what the hell? What did she come on here to say?
That I would then ask is, how, in your view, has Twitter materially changed in terms of the way it operates since Elon Musk took over?
I think it's not really about Elon Musk. And I think there's been a lot of reporting about, you know, how individuals have been terminated or how trust and safety teams have been gutted. And what I would encourage people to do is read the transcripts from the January 6th committee and ask yourself if that content would have come down before Elon Musk.
Yeah.
What? You are here to provide insight. What you're encouraging people to do is read the transcripts that you were a part of. You were there. Why don't you say it? Maddening. I don't know if she's intentionally trying to do this. I don't know if, I mean, she's coming here on her birthday. Supposedly, that would mean you had something to say. She just did a whole interview with Joy Reid. Didn't add anything. So why do this? What is she auditioning for? Who is she trying to please by sparing Elon Musk there? Look, maybe she genuinely believes that Elon Musk didn't have an effect on the hate speech on Twitter. I don't know how you would arrive at that conclusion. Maybe I have to guess she was saying that it was already so bad before Musk that he's not really the problem. Then what? What is the problem? Say that. I have answers, personally, based on what I've been looking at. But boy, would have preferred her to say, in her opinion, because she's the one getting interviewed by Joy Reid. Crazy to me that I genuinely don't get why she did this appearance.
I think I feel like I know the answer to it, but you are the expert, Anika Collier-Navaroli. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a very nice way of saying the same thing. Thanks for nothing. So a disappointing interview on Joy Reid's program. Not at all the fault of Joy Reid. I thought Reid did an excellent job of following up, but you can't pry open their jaws and pull the answer out at some point in an interview, especially in that format where you've got a commercial break to get to, so you have a finite amount of time. Yeah, the gish gavel works. Stalling works. I don't know why that person even chose to be on. Maybe who knows? Maybe they're gunning for a cable host job. She did say, though, one thing that is of value that we can use to get some insight into this current problem that we have, and maybe even look at this as a template for how to solve it. Current problem we have is hate speech is flying around on social media, and it's causing hateful dummies to do hateful things. This is not new. And as she said, yes, we have had this when new media was introduced. Basically every time. We had Birth of a Nation in the film industry. On radio, we had Charles Coughlin. This guy. This is from Wikipedia. This is a well-known enough thing that you can just go to Wikipedia and basically get the story. Link in the description, of course. Charles Edward Coughlin, commonly known as Father Coughlin, was a Canadian-American Catholic priest based in the United States near Detroit. Dubbed the radio priest, he was one of the first political leaders to use radio to reach a mass audience. Tell me that this is not going to start sounding like every psychopath right-wing streamer that you've heard. At its peak in the early to mid-1930s, Coughlin's radio show was phenomenally popular. He received up to 80,000 letters per week from his listeners. Author Sheldon Marcus said that the size of Coughlin's radio audience is impossible to determine, but estimates range up to 30 million each week. 30 million listeners back when the United States had about 120 million people in it. Think about that. This guy was basically Tucker Carlson. After the 1936 election, you might not know this about the United States if you have had a merciful life and didn't need to know this, but we had a lot of people sympathetic to Hitler. He was one. After the 1936 election, Coughlin expressed overt sympathy for the fascist governments of Hitler and Mussolini as an antidote to communism. So hated the idea of sharing his toys, he would side with Hitler. He believed Jewish bankers were behind the Russian Revolution, backing the Jewish Bolshevism conspiracy theory. At this time, Coughlin also began to support a far-right organization called the Christian Front. Terrorists, by the way, blew up an ammunition factory. 2 ammunition factories, as a matter of fact. Rachel Maddow did a wonderful podcast about this. Not Bagman. What was the other one? I'll look into it. Which claimed that he was an inspiration after the front's New York City unit was raided by the FBI in January 1940 for plotting to overthrow the government. It was revealed Coughlin had never been a member. Now, I do want to say he claimed to be a member before that raid. But let's take that at face value. you've got somebody inspiring far-right Christian national terrorists. This person is a mass media type. And once the people they inspire to terrorism get in trouble, they disavow them. They pretend like they had nothing to do with it. Tell me that story couldn't play out today, just like that. Tell me that isn't exactly what's going on with the Proud Boys, what's going on with the people that do mass shootings and say, this is for Tucker. Boom, 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 boom. Tell me that is not the Oath Keepers. Tell me that isn't every right-wing terrorist group that we currently have to worry about. That's them, baby. Coughlin promoted his controversial beliefs by means of his radio broadcasts and his weekly magazine Social Justice, which began publication in March 1936. During the last half of 1938, Social Justice reprinted weekly installments of the fraudulent anti-Semitic text, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion. That, by the way, is still floating around out there. It's on the internet. It is very popular in Nazi online forums. Despite this, Coughlin denied on various occasions that he was anti-Semitic. Oh yeah. That's like Tucker Carlson saying, "I'm not racist." Yet he received indirect funding from Nazi Germany during this period. Let me read that last part again. He received indirect funding from Nazi Germany during this period. What is indirect funding? The Nazis had plants in America. Literally people living in America whose job, just like the Russians do now, whose job was to finance things just like this. They also bribed politicians. Again, Rachel Maddow's podcast is phenomenal. You know what? It's worth breaking up the flow just a little bit to tell you the name of that podcast. I'm annoyed that I cannot recall it. Father Coughlin, Wikipedia. References in popular culture. What was the name of that? Ultra. Ultra was the name of the podcast. I love that podcast. I don't know why I couldn't recall the name. It's fascinating. I do recommend you give it a listen. Hell, I'll even include it in the link to it in the description. You can listen to it for free. At least you could when I heard it. So there were actual Nazis in the United States paying people to spread hate like this. So what did the government do about it? Why did this stop? Well, it stopped for two reasons. Now, I'm going to be frank about reason number one. And this came after what we're about to go into. But among the main reasons is that pro-Nazi stuff went real out of favor after Pearl Harbor. Then America was on board for fighting them. Before that happened, on December 18, 1938, thousands of Coughlin's followers packed WMCA's studios in protest, with some protesters yelling anti-Semitic statements such as, "Send Jews back where they came from in leaky boats." Remember Charlottesville? The Jews will not replace us? Ooh, boy. History rhymes. And wait until Hitler comes over here. Like that's a good thing. The protests continued for several months. Coughlin increasingly attacked the president's policies, the administration decided that, although the First Amendment protected free speech, it did not necessarily apply to broadcasting because the radio spectrum was a limited national resource, and as a result was regulated as a publicly owned commons. The authorities imposed new regulations, invented regulations, and restrictions for the specific purpose of forcing Coughlin off the air. For the first time, the authorities required regular radio broadcasters to seek operating permits. Look, I am not suggesting that the government decide what you can and cannot say on the internet. Matter of fact, I think the government should not be able to make that decision. If Father Coughlin was alive today, and I wasn't personally shouting over him every time he tried to talk, calling him a fascist, I would not suggest that the government interrupt his broadcast. Crazy as that may sound. That doesn't mean we have to sit back and do nothing. That doesn't mean we have to leave all questions unanswered and just accept inaction as a strategy. Just hope that our Pearl Harbor is one we can survive. That it's somehow more shocking than January 6th, but not as damaging to our democracy. We don't have to do that. We can demand regulations that do not infringe upon free speech. They named the problem in that interview, and they did a bad job of addressing what to do about it. Well, that's why this exists. There's a lack of regulation. The company, Twitter, profits off this speech. It is not their free speech when a Nazi gets on their platform and says, you should hate trans people, you should hate Jews, you should hate N-words. This is not Twitter's free speech. Twitter doesn't have free speech. Twitter is a company. So if you're going to make a mass communication company, you have an obligation to regulate hate speech. You have an obligation to regulate incitements to violence. The fact that they have 20 people in a room going through the output of millions of accounts, well, of course that's designed to fail. They don't care. But Twitter is a multi-billion-dollar company. How much did Musk buy for? Was it like 40-something? Okay. They can spend an extra $200 million a year if they're going to be that big on employees whose only job it is to regulate this stuff. And we can insist that they must do that. We can put in new regulations that insist that mass communication companies take responsibility for the mass communications. There is certainly something to be said for preserving people's freedom of speech and erring on the side of that. But let's not pretend like we don't have Nazis doing Nazi stuff in 2023. We do. It's a reality. And we have an environment which is not free if you consider yourself, if you consider the perspective of a black kid. Imagine there's the N-word getting tossed around on this platform. There's no warning to you as let's say a 13-year-old kid from Wisconsin. You happen to be black. You log on, and all of a sudden you're getting hit with N-word, 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 N-word. It's not very free for that kid, is it? That kid's not going to be able to go on that platform and exercise their free speech because they're going to get called horrible things. If you have an interest in stopping this, in pulling the modern equivalents of Father Coughlin off the air, contact your representative. Insist that we develop modern regulations for mass communication. Establish a few lines of decency. We don't need to infringe upon free speech, but we do need to have responsible platforms. And that means we cannot have multi-billion-dollar platforms with under 100 employees controlling them, monitoring them, making sure the person shouting N-word this, N-word that, doesn't have any fear at all of being discovered when they try to plan a terrorist activity, when they do full-on hate speech, when they incite people to violence. When they cross that line, they need to know they're doing so in a public space. They're being monitored like you would if you were in a crowd shouting these things. There is the fair opportunity for the laws that are on the books that are designed to keep people safe against this exact kind of speech. We need to ensure that those will be applied. We cannot wait for the attacks to happen and then retroactively try to trace back what caused them. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. So contact your representative. Tell them you would like strong regulations on these mass communication companies. Let's have a look at the comments here. Andrew Woznicki says, enjoying your content, Jake, as always, especially your humor. Keep up the great work and coverage. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. Chris Andrews says, hi, everybody. Hello, Christopher Andrews. Good to see you. Patrick Kibido says, really just before, but no spoilers. I'm going to try to say this. Correct me if I'm wrong. John Uell, I'm just going to stick with the first. John Uell says, Elon is a joke. Talk about undeserved wealth. My God. Yes, you are quite correct. He's also in bed with Saudi Arabia. Yeah, and I don't like that he's been somewhat iffy with Starlink. I bet the only thing in his favor, in my mind, had been his giving of Starlink to the use of Ukraine, the Ukrainian forces in defense of Ukraine. But he is, even with that, not been fully fulfilling his end of the bargain. Really, a guy I do not trust as far as I can throw him. Well, Senator Dianne Feinstein has been pretty much a conservative for most of her career. She's of that school of neoliberalism that is, it's just favoring the wealthy as politics. And thankfully, she has announced she is going to retire. It's under sad circumstances. I wish it weren't so, but I'm glad to see her go. This is the Young Turks talking about this news recently. Here they are.
Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein has just announced that she will no longer run for re-election in 2024, which is a pretty major moment in history because she was non-committal to not running in 2024. Now, there are already talks about who will run for her position. Now, she says in a statement, I'm announcing today I will not run for re-election in 2024, but intend to accomplish as much for California as I can through the end of next year when my term ends. She has accomplished a lot for herself during her time in the Senate, including increasing her net worth by $200 million. Public servant.
That is, by the way, something this is an aspirational law. This is assuming we get about 2 elections straight with Democrats controlling everything and progressives gaining a majority of the Democratic Party. Pie in the sky stuff, but I would love, crazy as it may seem, to pass laws that prohibit politicians from getting any other income except the income they draw as their paycheck. Obviously, that wouldn't stop their spouses from doing this or that, but you should not be retiring with the better part of $250 million if you are a senator, for God's sake.
Let me continue. She also says, I campaigned in 2018 on several priorities for California and the nation, preventing and combating wildfires, mitigating the effects of record-setting drought.
No, if you tried all that, you totally failed.
Jesus Christ, I would not list these things because every single thing that she has listed has been a failure. Responding to the homelessness crisis.
Wow.
And ensuring all Americans have access to affordable, high-quality health care. To be fair,
that's not even true.
Well, to be fair, California does have a good Medicaid program. I remember when I was a kid and my parents didn't have money for health care, it was called Healthy Families back in the day, and it was excellent. But that was the statewide program.
Yeah,
she's a federal employee.
And she's against Medicare for all. That's just nothing but a lie. But it doesn't really matter because she didn't write that statement.
Exactly.
We'll get to who actually wrote it in a second.
Congress has enacted legislation on all of these topics over the past several years, but more needs to be done, and I will continue these efforts.
What legislation? What are you talking about?
I just want to reiterate, she increased her net worth by $200 million as a public servant.
Yeah.
That says a lot.
And she didn't go in a billionaire, so it wasn't like, oh, she had 1.2 billion and now it's 1.4 billion. No, her family somehow, it's always a coincidence. And
wait, did I mishear that? She has 1.4 billion? Oh, she increased. Oh. I'll have to listen to that again. It's besides the point. If she only had 200 million, that in and of itself would be disgusting to me. The fact that she increased her worth by that much, good Lord.
Anytime you talk to a reporter in America, whenever it's a powerful person, oh, it's a coincidence. Or campaign contributors got everything they ever wanted from her. Coincidence. She personally got $200 million. Coincidence. Huh? Well, a lot of coincidences with Dianne Feinstein. What you're going to see about her retirement from now on in mainstream media is, what a legendary figure Dianne Feinstein.
Just prepare yourself for that. That was the hardest, when I kind of woke up in 2016 as to what American politics actually is. I was actually, believe it or not, delighted when Donald Trump won the nomination for the GOP. Because I thought, well, look at that. We're going to get our first woman president. Oh, boy. Still hurting from that piece of arrogance. No, get him, Jank. 100% correct. The corporate media will act as though she was this like legendary figure who fought for people's rights and blah, blah, blah. They're going to show that picture of her next to Harvey Milk constantly, as though she hasn't backed legislation that Milk would have hated consistently since those days. With admittedly some exceptions, but an absolutely nightmare neoliberal agenda, and it's gonna grate to see her get praised over and over and over, and it's going to utterly, it's going to give a wrong impression to people who are just getting into politics or people who only casually watch politics about who Dianne Feinstein was.
Okay, just she accomplished so much. And then so I always read the articles and I go, because I know the facts. Okay, what was so much that she accomplished? Over 30 years, okay? Assault weapons ban, super happy about it. She was part of the people that did that. You know why? Because she was involved in one of the worst, like one of the most historic shootings in American history, where Harvey Milk, the great LGBTQ fighter and mayor in San Francisco, was shot and killed. So that affected her personally. She's like, whoa, let's do something about this, okay? So the CIA spying, she revealed some of their spying, which was great. I'm happy about it. You know why? Because they spied in on her. And she even said it. We covered it on the Young Turks at the time. She's like, oh, well, before when you're spying on Americans, what's the big deal? But now senators, you do this to me, how dare you? So all of a sudden she cared. Two things in over 30 years, and only because they personally affected her. And so that is a miserable record. But wait a minute, is that all she did? No, the crimes of omission in mainstream media is far worse. They don't tell you that she voted for giant tax cuts for the rich when Republicans were in charge.
With Republicans.
They don't tell you that she voted for the Iraq War. They don't tell you that her voting record is actually, weirdly, for one of the most progressive states in the country, California, one of the most conservative voting records you'll ever find on the Democratic side.
This happens in California, by the way, the same way Gavin Newsom is the governor of California. He's done some fine things, yes. By and large, I'm not satisfied with the guy. But he's able to be in power because a lot of folks that don't follow politics very closely look at mainstream Democrats, or rather, I should say, corporate Democrats, the way I used to look at Hillary Clinton. I liked Bernie Sanders more than Hillary Clinton way back in 2015, but I voted, sorry to tell you this, for Clinton in the primaries, because I fell for the same line that mainstream media was pushing, which was that Sanders wasn't electable and Clinton was. With knowledge I have now, I want to just wring that young Jake's neck. Young being a generous word there, but it's not so. Similarly, they look at your Newsoms and your Feinsteins and they think this is a serious politician. And they look at Katie Porter, who's pushing progressive ideas. And they think, oh, that's a crazy lefty. As though there's no reason this person is as far left as they are. We have to stop thinking like that, because the weakness in the Democratic Party, the genuine weakness, comes from the right. It is the people that claim to be centrists and are in fact simply loyal to corporations. That is where the weakness is in the Democratic Party. If you had all progressives running, you would never see Republicans hold a majority ever again.
Her voting record is so conservative that it's to the right of where I was when I was a liberal Republican growing up in the 80s and 90s. I mean, it's so conservative economically to the hilt. Yet you will see now all of these great pronouncements of what a great Democratic left-wing liberal leader she was, a historic figure. And finally, and we're going to tell you what's actually going on in a second. Finally, they say, oh, and you have to remember, she's a woman. Wow, okay, she's like 50% of the population. Okay, well, but I didn't know she was that historic. Okay, if you're a woman who's a trendsetter and you actually fight for us and you fight for other women, then I love you. If you're a woman who's just a corporate stooge, I don't give a goddamn that you're a woman.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. Now, in terms of why she's really stepping down, I'm sure most people know this, but for those who don't, she has been experiencing cognitive decline. It's been in the news. Even some of her own staffers have spoken to the press about this, of course, with the protection of anonymity.
I'm going to let this part play just in case you guys weren't aware, but yeah, and then we're going to move on. But yeah, Dianne Feinstein, she's been genuinely having some health problems that are now starting to affect her job. So it makes sense that she's stepping down now. There is a slim chance that she will not actually be able to finish out her current term. I say slim and I mean it. I don't think it's likely that she won't finish her term, but there is a chance. Here's Anna.
But Christian Hall tweeted the following. Asked by reporters about her announcement to resign, Senator Feinstein says, quote, "If I haven't made that decision, I haven't released anything." A staffer then told the senator that a statement had been released. Feinstein responded saying, quote, "I didn't know they put it out."
No, she's gone, guys. Yeah. Like, people report talking to her 1 minute, getting an answer, the next minute getting a different answer because she already forgot. By the way, it's on tape. We've seen her do it in hearings. She'll read a statement and then just a little while later, she'll reread the statement because she forgot she just read it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they go on for a bit there, and I don't want to dwell on that. You get it. She cognitive decline. Okay, fair enough. She's an older lady. That unfortunately happens sometimes. I in terms of health, I wish her the best. But something interesting about the fact that she may not finish her term, and this is mostly just so we can watch Gavin Newsom squirm a little bit. This is from the Los Angeles Times. When Governor Gavin Newsom pledged during the 2021 recall election to appoint a black woman to replace Feinstein if she stepped down, political experts speculated that he was referring to Barbara Lee. At the time, I believe what he said was he had multiple people in mind, but they were all black women. I don't know who he would be referring to if not Barbara Lee. This would be to appoint to Feinstein's seat if she has to step down early. As the only member of Congress to vote against the measure, this is a little background on Barbara Lee, and you'll see why I like her. As the only member of Congress to vote against the measure that authorized President George W. Bush to use military force after the September 11th terrorist attacks. Remember when he lied to us? Said he had knowledge of weapons of mass destruction, but he did not. In fact, he had been told the opposite. Lee was thrust into the national spotlight. She argued that the law granted the president too much power and warned her fellow lawmakers to be careful not to embark on an open-ended war with neither an exit strategy nor a focused target. Now that seems like the only sane voice at the time. I remember those days, though. And this next part, unfortunately, makes sense to me from the attitude of the country in those days, which was not sure what patriotism was supposed to look like, other than apparently unquestioning loyalty to the Führer. I'm sorry, I mean president. In the aftermath of her vote, Lee was viewed as a pariah by many, including people in her party, and received death threats. But after decades of overseas entanglements, politicians in both parties now make arguments that echo what Lee said way back in 2001. We got attacked in September of 2001. Think of the foresight you have to look past the collapsing buildings and look at where we were sending troops and under what circumstances. That's incredible foresight. If Newsom actually makes good on what he said, rather, if Feinstein actually does have to step down for health reasons, and Newsom actually makes good with what he said, boy, we're gonna have someone in the Senate that I would be delighted to have there. But that's not likely because Feinstein says she's going to finish out her term. Let's assume she will. There are already candidates that are running for her seat. They announced before she said she would retire, I think in part to encourage her to do so. Cruel or not, it is what it is. We have Adam Schiff. He's confirmed. And Katie Porter, also confirmed. My pick, Katie Porter. She's the progressive. I think Adam Schiff is just Feinstein 2.0 in terms of his policy. I do appreciate the work he did on the January 6th committee. No denying that. But when it comes down to how he votes on, in my opinion, the key issues, economic issues, very much a neoliberal, whereas Porter is very much a progressive. And Porter would have my support. That said, I'm going to be looking at those primaries. I'm very curious to see who California is going to pick. I'm very curious to see who they're going to have to choose from. If you are in California, there is a link in the description that will tell you when you are supposed to vote in the primaries. Mark it on your calendar. We need a lot of voices, and a robust primary is a healthy primary. A lot of people engaging in political debate is good for the party. Even if the person you like doesn't end up getting elected, they still get time in front of the cameras. They still get to pitch their argument. And if their argument's bad, they get it picked apart by their competition. If their competition has bad arguments, they get theirs picked apart by the other people that want that seat. The end result is they go in to the general election not preparing to walk into landmines that they should have known about. And frankly, you get them having to think more about what they're saying and how it will come off. It is good to have a robust primary. So I encourage you, vote in the primaries, because I think we should go especially in a deep blue state like California, we should go as left as we possibly can. And I will be covering them with great interest. Let's have a gander. Oh, hey, it's the anti-corporatist. Good to see you, man. Okay, going back up a little bit. John Ewell says he's also in bed with... Oh, we reread that. John Ewell says, we really need some insider trading laws for these politicians. Yes, agreed. 100% yes. The anti-corporatist says, yup, if they're invested in anything, it should be a fund that's diversified into more than just the U.S. stock market so that they wouldn't have a pro-Wall Street bias either. You know what? I really like that. To me, that is that's a good compromise. A way to say, look, you can still have stocks, but you can't. It's got to be blind in some way. You can't be loyal to one person, because what is that if not a bribe? It's a prearranged bribe, and of course it would have to be blind. There you go. Didn't she marry a billionaire? She might have, but the decision, the decisions she made in office were like like if you read a billionaire's diary. So any way she arrived at that, the fact that she got personally richer by $200 million, it not only has the appearance of corruption, I don't know how it can be anything except corruption. She accomplished getting Kavanaugh, though. Well, fair enough. And then, oh my effing G, Cambridge Analytica was so effective that I read a psychographically targeted fake news on Facebook and ended up writing in Bernie in the general. Fair enough. Is Schiff the richest member of Congress? I don't know, but it wouldn't surprise me. Pelosi's obviously left, but I would have thought it would have been Pelosi last year. But that's a good question, actually. You've now inspired a new avenue that I want to look at. Who is the richest member of Congress, or at least the richest Democrat in Congress? That would be interesting to see. I'll look into that. We got something of a palate cleanser here. Greg Abbott oversaw the privatization of the Texas power grid. And now, once again, it's not working so good. Brian Tyler Cohen did a really cool, to-the-point short on it. Let's pull it up.
Here's Texas Governor Greg Abbott after the last time 5 million Texans lost power because the power grid failed.
I can guarantee the lights will stay on.
And yet here he is ahead of the latest power grid failure.
Well, listen, no one can guarantee that there won't be a, quote, load shed event.
And if you're wondering what changed Abbott's guarantee, why 70,000 Texans are without power.
A load shed event. A load shed event. That is, I mean, politics talk 101. Don't call it what it is if it's embarrassing.
Right now, it's because when Republicans passed their law requiring the power grid be weatherized, they also wrote in a fun little loophole that natural gas companies could simply not declare themselves to be critical infrastructure with the state, and they'd be exempt, which of course came after Greg Abbott received a $1 million donation from a guy named Kelsey Warren, the executive chairman of Transfer Energy Partners. That's the company that profited $2.4 billion during the last blackout in Texas. So if you were wondering why the governor of Texas is more interested in coddling natural gas companies than the citizens that they're supposed to serve, now you know.
Yes, we do. Good God. $2.4, did he say? $billion? Good God. Yeah, a loophole written in that makes the law that he then is going to take credit for pushing, makes the law irrelevant. What can you do about this? Show that clip In fact, we're going to combine two things. Show that clip to your MAGA associates if you've got them. And I recommend you take the unsubscribe challenge with them. The unsubscribe challenge is when you challenge somebody who's got disinformation motivating them to watch a YouTube clip with you, and you watch one with them. So you guys each pick one. And you race. And the first person, so you both watch the entirety of it, and you both ask to pause when necessary to look something up. The first person whose clip has incorrect information in it loses. And that person has to unsubscribe from that person that they watch for 1 week. Not forever. Certainly not forever. Just 1 week. Number one, you shouldn't be afraid of losing. Because if it turns out that something was said on a program that you watched that is incorrect, most likely, if you are on the left, this is no sweat to you. You simply say, I'm going to tell that person in that program, I bet they'll issue a correction, and I will make a note of it for the future. And I will not be misinformed then. We have no fear. Just like scientists have no fear of finding out they were wrong. People on the left have no fear of receiving new information and adapting to it. It's like challenging a vampire to a tanning contest. We'll be fine. Also, you'll note that it is very rare for lefties to get something flat out wrong, because left media is all about packaging true facts in a way that is easily presented or satisfyingly presented, whereas right media is about skewing or spinning facts to make a case, to dupe people. There's a reason that Steven Crowder and Tim Pool, all these folks got their start with billionaires donating to their networks, because they are spin artists. So take advantage of that. Stick the knife and twist it. Do the unsubscribe challenge with them. I recommend that clip right there. It can only be helpful. And even if you guys both watch your clips and you know what? Nobody said anything wrong. At the end of the day, you're still exposing them to good content. They are still getting just a little bit of education snuck in there that is going to be healthy for them. What I do not recommend you use is the live stream of yesterday's show. I have a correction to issue. Yesterday, I tore in to Joe Biden for not firing Louis DeJoy. And a viewer quite correctly pointed out that, no, sir, he does not have that authority. I didn't even believe the viewer. I had to go look it up twice. I was so convinced that he had that authority. No, he does not. Once every 7 years, the board of people that can fire Louis DeJoy can be appointed by Biden upon the advice of the Senate, but he does not have the direct power to fire Louis DeJoy. Louis, whatever. He can't fire DeJoy. That's a correction from your old pal Jake. The left does not have a problem updating their stories when new information becomes available, and certainly does not have a problem issuing a correction, because we bask in the truth, and we welcome it. Take advantage of that. Engage in the unsubscribe challenge. You will find that MAGA folks have a hard time with it. Before we wrap it up, let's have one more look at these comments. It was Schiff, I think, if I recall correctly, he made billions in telecom. Oh, that would make sense. The fact that someone can make $2.4 billion, not while, but because tens of thousands of people literally froze to death, tells you everything you need to know about this country. I don't think tens of thousands of people froze to death, but tens of thousands of people were certainly without power, and among them, yeah, people froze to death. The core of what you're saying is I fully agree with. They knew what they were doing every step of the way, and there will come a time when people start going to prison for this, and it can't come soon enough. DeJoy needs to be in. That was Patrick Kibdo, and the anti-corporatist says DeJoy needs to be impeached and imprisoned. In my opinion, I sort of agree. I do think he needs to get gone as soon as possible by any legal means necessary. But he was a snake. He never hid that he was a snake, and he was appointed to be snake-like. So I will take my satisfaction from Trump's inevitable legal demise. Here's hoping that we have a Justice Department that's worth a damn. Well, folks, it has been a delight doing the stream today. I'm going to get to chopping it, and I'm very excited to bring you our first interview. We had a recommendation as to what to do next with the channel. The overwhelming opinion was that interviews should be next, and so that's what we've done. It's with the folks from the True North Eager Beaver podcast. If you haven't checked out their show, I recommend it. It's fantastic. I'm going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much for joining me. This has been WYCD Wicked. That stands for What You Can Do. I'm your old pal Jake, and I'll see you next time.